Under the vast sky of Montana, the distant mountains stretch out like a serene painting, where the wind whistles through the ancient pines and the sound of birds chirps sweetly in the expansive air. Ironwood Valley nestles between the snow-covered hills, a place where time seems to have been forgotten. The golden fields of barley sway in the early breeze, reflecting the vibrant orange hues of the sunrise on every blade of grass. Here, life flows slowly, so peacefully that it feels like nothing could ever disrupt that tranquility. But on that fateful morning, a storm was quietly approaching, carrying the scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Jack Buck Larson, a 65-year-old farmer with silver hair and calloused hands from years of hard work, stepped out of his old wooden house. His worn leather boots crunched on the thin layer of fog covering the ground, leaving deep footprints on the trail leading to the fields. Beside him, his German shepherd named Boomer trotted along, ears perked up and bright brown eyes always alert. Jack paused, taking a deep breath of the fresh mountain air, feeling the morning chill seep through his faded flannel jacket. This was the place he called home, where he had lived for over 2 decades after leaving the smoke and chaos of the battlefield. A simple life, quiet and undisturbed at least until today. On the distant hilltop, an unusual dark figure cut across the horizon. Jack squinted, his hand instinctively tightening around the handle of the oak walking stick he always carried. It wasn't the delivery truck of the local folks, nor was it the rickety pickup of his neighbor, Ellie Harper. 3 glossy black SUVs, their oversized tires crunching over the rugged dirt road, advanced ominously, kicking up a cloud of dust behind them like an unwelcome warning. He muttered to Boomer, his voice low but sharp, "Something's not right, buddy." The dog responded with a low growl, as if agreeing with his owner's unsettling intuition. The Ironwood Valley wasn't a place where strangers stopped by. The folks here kept to themselves, familiar with every face and every vehicle that passed through. So, when those unfamiliar cars showed up, Jack knew right away they weren't here to ask for directions or buy some barley. He turned and hurried toward the barn, where he kept a few things that no one in this valley would ever suspect remnants of a past he had tried to bury. But just before he could open the barn door, a familiar figure appeared on the road leading to the farm. Ellie Harper, Jack's closest neighbor, pulled up in her old Ford pickup, the engine growling like a wounded beast. Ellie, a slender woman with her gray hair tied back, jumped out of the truck, her light blue eyes wide with worry. "Jack, thank goodness you're here," she shouted, her voice trembling. "Have you heard anything about the Thompsons?" Jack turned back, leaning against a wooden fence, trying to maintain his composure even though a storm was brewing inside him. "Thompson? What's going on with them, Ellie?" he asked, his voice steady, but his sharp eyes never left her wrinkled face. "They're gone," Ellie replied, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as if to hold back her rising panic. "Last night, without a word, without a goodbye. This morning, I went over there and only saw a few strange guys hanging around the house. A big black SUV, and those guys didn't look like they belonged in the neighborhood at all." Jack bent down, picking up a small pebble from the ground, rolling it back and forth between his rough fingers. "Cartel," he said, his voice as cold as the winter wind blowing through the valley. It wasn't a question, but a statement. He had heard the rumors, the whispers at the cafe in town about the folks from the south eyeing the land. Those who weren't afraid to use money, or worse, the barrel of a gun, to get what they wanted. Ellie nodded, her lips pressed tight. "The folks in town say that. They're moving up from the south, buying up farms. Anyone who doesn't sell, well, accidents just seem to happen." She lowered her voice, almost whispering. "They haven't come for me yet, but last week the Miller's place got bought out. The money's just too good to turn down, and everyone who stays behind talks about those strange guys using the land as a distribution network." Jack nodded slowly, his mind starting to work the way it had for 3 decades in the military, analyzing, calculating, planning. "It makes sense," he said in a deep voice. "A secluded property, no one around to notice the traffic, a ready-made storage facility. They want to turn this valley into their hub." He glanced at the 3 SUVs that had now stopped around a bend, about a mile from his farm, as if watching from a distance. Ellie clutched Jack's hand tightly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. Jack, this isn't just some petty crime ring. They're organized, well-funded, and no one dares to stand up against them. The sheriff can't do anything, and the others are scared to death. What are you going to do about it? Jack gently patted her hand, his eyes shining with a spark Ellie had never seen before. Not fear, but something sharp, dangerous, like a hidden blade beneath the tattered shirt of an old farmer. Don't worry about me, Ellie, he said, his voice steady. I've dealt with much worse. Just be careful. They're targeting this whole valley. Before long, they'll be knocking on your door. Ellie nodded, though her eyes were still filled with doubt, then climbed into the vehicle and drove away, leaving Jack and Boomer in the vast field. He turned back to look at the SUVs, which were now slowly moving toward the farm gate. The rumble of the engines echoed through quiet space, like the growl of a predator drawing near. Jack curled his lip, a faint, cold smile forming. They think they're hunting an old man, he muttered to Boomer. They're wrong. He walked toward the stable, his hand creaking the wooden door open, revealing a dark corner inside. Beneath the false floor he had installed since the day he arrived, a secret bunker lay filled with military gear items that old friends had once mocked as the delusions of an old soldier. Jack called it preparation. He lifted the board, and a dim light illuminated rifles, tactical communication equipment, and meticulously maintained body armor. These were things he had once hoped he would never have to use again, but today they would be awakened. The tension peaked as 3 SUVs came to a halt in front of farm gate. 5 men stepped out, their expensive suits standing out against the dusty rural backdrop. They approached with a confident swagger, like wolves catching a whiff of blood. Leading the pack was Victor Blade Morales, a tall guy with eyes as cold as winter steel and a smile polished to perfection. He raised a hand in greeting to Jack, his voice smooth as silk. Mr. Larson, right? Beautiful farm you have here. We're here to discuss business. Jack stood still, his hand gently resting on Boomer's head as the dog let out a low growl. He glanced at Victor, then at the group of henchmen stealthily making their way toward the horse stable, as if they were scouting the area. What business brings you all the way out here? Jack asked, his tone calm. But in his mind, everything was already in motion, calculating angles, identifying weaknesses, and plotting a counterattack. Victor smiled, the kind of smile that someone wears when they think they have victory in the bag. It's just a suggestion, my old friend. But I advise you to listen closely, because we really don't like hearing the word no. He stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching on the fog, completely unaware that it just entered the territory of a sleeping beast that was about to awaken. As Victor Blade Morales and his gang stood at the gate of the farm, Jack, Buck Larson maintained the calm demeanor of an old farmer. He leaned against the weathered wooden fence, his gnarled hands tucked into the pockets of his faded flannel jacket. Boomer sat beside him, ears perked up, bright brown eyes fixed on the strangers, as if they were a pack of wolves encroaching on his territory. The early sunlight filtered through the pine branches, casting deep shadows across Jack's weathered face, the lines and wrinkles telling the story of a life that was anything but simple, a life stained with blood and smoke. Victor smirked, his smile sharp as a knife, his cold eyes scanning Jack's small farm as if appraising a cheap piece of merchandise. Mr. Larson, we don't like to beat around the bush, he said, his voice smooth but laced with an unmistakable threat. $3 million cash for this land, more than it's worth. What do you say? Jack bent down and gently patted Boomer's head, calming the dog even though it still let out a low growl from its throat. He straightened up, looking directly at Victor, his voice steady as if he were discussing the upcoming harvest. Not for sale. This land has been in my family for far too long. He shrugged, as if that was the most obvious answer in the world, needing no further discussion. Victor squinted, the smile on his face freezing like ice. He stepped closer, his shiny shoes crunching on the damp earth still glistening with dew, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You should think carefully, old man. This valley is changing. Stubborn folks like you often run into little accidents, big losses. You don't want that, do you? Jack stood tall, his eyes glinting with a cold light that Victor didn't catch a spark from someone who had stared death in the face without flinching. Sounds like a threat, buddy, he said, his voice calm yet carrying a weight that only those who have faced death could truly understand. Victor paused, Momentarily surprised that Jack had called him by name and name, he surely couldn't know if he were just an ordinary farmer. But he quickly regained his confidence, shrugging it off as if it were nothing. Just a piece of advice. You've got 24 hours to change your mind. As the black SUVs disappeared around a bend, leaving a cloud of dust swirling on the bumpy dirt road, Jack stood still for a moment, his gaze following them until all that remained was the distant sound of engines echoing like the whimper of a wounded beast. He turned away, leading Boomer toward the horse barn, where the old wooden door creaked open as if it had been waiting for him all along. "They have no idea what they just poked at, do they, Boomer?" he muttered, and the dog responded with a gentle wag of his tail, as if agreeing with his owner's ominous intuition. Inside the stable, a cool atmosphere enveloped the space, the scent of dry hay and old wood mingling in the quiet so profoundly that you could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. Jack knelt down. Lifting the false floor he had installed since the day he bought this piece of land, a meticulous project he had spent weeks perfecting, driven by the instincts of a restless old soldier. A faint light shone through the gap, illuminating a hidden arsenal. Gleaming M4 rifles, smoke grenades neatly arranged like in a military supply room, a set of military communication gear still coated in protective oil, and a small, tarnished metal box quietly resting in the corner. He opened the box, pulling out an old Delta Force badge, his rough fingers gliding over the engraved words. Phantom. That was his nickname, the name his comrades gave him for his ability to appear out of nowhere, strike with ruthless precision, and vanish before the enemy even had a chance to react. Jack wasn't always the reclusive farmer living in Montana. 30 years ago, he was one of the most dangerous commanders in Delta Force, leading top-secret missions that even the Pentagon wouldn't dare document. Memories flood back like a grainy black-and-white film. Moonless nights in the Middle Eastern desert, the crack of gunfire slicing through the air, and the smell of gunpowder mingling with the dry, dusty sand. Once in Afghanistan, his team ambushed a convoy of terrorists in a mountain pass, wiping out the leadership without leaving a trace, except for the charred remains of vehicles and columns of smoke rising into the sky. Like a ghost? Tommy Red Callahan, the team's sharpshooter, once said during a night around the campfire base, his voice raspy from dust and cheap whiskey. That name stuck with Jack from then on, from the desert of Afghanistan to the jungles of Colombia, from the dark alleys of Somalia to the desolate lands that didn't even have names on the map. But war doesn't just leave behind medals and glory. It also leaves scars on the body and in the soul. Jack still remembers a battle in Iraq, the night he lost two brothers, Tommy Red Callahan and Pete Doc Grayson. A mistake from the higher-ups, a misdirected airstrike, and in the blink of an eye, his two best soldiers turned to dust in the desert. That night, Jack stood alone on the hilltop, looking down at the blazing valley, his hands trembling not from the cold but from an anger he couldn't contain. He screamed into the wind, but the wind just carried his cries away, offering no answers in return. After that battle, he left the military, hung up his uniform, and turned his back on the noisy cities filled with honking cars and blinding neon lights. He sought refuge in Ironwood Valley to escape the past, to find a place where he could live without the sound of gunfire or the smell of blood. He bought this piece of land with his last savings, built a wooden house with his calloused hands, planted barley, raised chickens, and lived a life he hoped would be peaceful forever. But now, standing in front of the old arsenal, Jack knew that the past would never truly let him go. He sat down on the old wooden chair in the shed, picked up the M4, and checked the barrel with movements so practiced they were almost instinctive, disassembling it, inspecting the magazine, gently wiping off protective oil. He recalled the last time he held it during a mission in Colombia, raiding the stronghold of the largest drug cartel in the region. His team had wiped out an entire army, destroying tons of cocaine, leaving only ashes and frantic whispers about the American ghost in the South American criminal underworld. He remembered the feeling of standing in the darkness, hearing the enemy scream in panic before falling silent forever, the wind howling through the jungle, and the crackling of fire on the charred crates. Those were the days he lived for the fight, for his brothers, for a cause he once believed was noble. But now, his purpose had shifted not to protect the country or fulfill orders from above, but to safeguard this little piece of land he called home, where he poured his sweat and the remnants of his dreams into building. Jack set the gun down, stood up, and stepped out of the barn. Boomer scampered after him, like a little soldier always ready by his commander's side. Jack paused in the middle of the field, his gaze sweeping over the distant hills, where the early sunlight danced on the golden grass, reflecting light like a brilliant carpet. He took a deep breath, feeling the fresh Montana air fill his lungs, but this time it carried a difference in the smell of danger approaching, the scent of gunpowder and tension he had once known as well as his own breath. He wasn't afraid. Fear was something he left behind on the battlefield long ago, after hundreds of nights sleeping with his gun by his side, and days waking up not knowing if he would make it through. Instead, he felt something stirring within him, the desire to fight, the instinct of a ghost that had never truly rested, merely buried beneath this Montana soil for a while. The phone rang, cutting through Jack's train of thought. He pulled out his old Nokia from his shirt pocket. The phone he kept because it was durable and never ran out of battery in a pinch. The screen lit up with a message from Jimmy Hawk Russo, an old friend from the investigative police, someone who had worked with Jack on a few crime sweeps after he retired. A tall guy with sun-bleached hair and a smile that was always half joking, half serious. The cartel was moving fast. 7 farms had fallen into their hands last month. Watch your back. Jack smirked, a faint, cold smile, then tucked the phone back into his pocket. He stepped into the house, pulling out the valley map from his desk drawer, a worn-out map, its edges yellowed, but he kept it like a treasure. He spread it out on the kitchen table, the scribbled pencil lines marking the positions he had long prepared defensive points on the high ground to the north, shooting angles from the barn, escape routes through the thick pine forest behind the house. This wasn't just a farm. It was a fortress, designed by a man who had lived to fight and survived countless battles that no one dared to mention in history books. Jack sat down, his fingers tracing the lines on the map, his mind starting to operate like a tactical machine rebooting after years of silence. His land was strategically positioned to control the main road into the valley, with a clear view of 3 approaches from the south, east, and west. He had chosen this piece of land not just for its beauty or fertile soil, but also for its tactical potential, a habit of a soldier that was still deeply ingrained in him. Despite his attempts to forget, it was no surprise that the cartel had set their sights on it. But they didn't realize they were not just facing an old farmer. They were up against someone who had once made far more dangerous men tremble, someone who had turned blood-soaked battlefields into nightmares for anyone daring enough to confront him. He recalled a night in Somalia when his team was ambushed by rebels in an abandoned village. The odds were 10-1, the sky pitch black without a star in sight, but Jack led his team out, turning the dark alleys into deadly traps for the enemy, using their own weapons against them. If the cartel thought a few guys in suits and some guns could intimidate him, they were about to pay a steep price they could never have imagined. Boomer barked, a short and sharp bark that pulled Jack out his thoughts. He stood up, stepped out onto the porch, and saw 3 black SUVs pulling back, this time stopping right in front of the gate with clearer sense of determination. Victor stepped out again, but now his confidence had faded a bit, replaced by a wariness like a predator sensing danger. Beside him, a few goons were scattered around, hands hidden under their jackets, clearly armed with what might be handguns or daggers, things that cartel members always carried as a silent warning. "Mr. Larson," he called out loudly, his voice echoing to the quiet of the peaceful morning, shattering the tranquility that Jack had once cherished in this place. "Your time to think is running out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jack stood on the porch, gripping the wooden cane he usually relied on for long walks, but his gaze was no longer that of a gentle farmer. It was the look of a predator watching its prey, patient and cold, the eyes of a man who had walked past hundreds of corpses without turning back. He stepped down the stairs, his leather boots crunching on a layer of fog covering the ground, his voice deep yet sharp as a finely honed dagger. "I already told you," he replied, each word coming out slowly but as solid as a nail driven into wood. "This land is not for sale. And, buddy, if you dare to lay a hand on my dog, that will be your last mistake." Victor froze, a flicker of unease crossing his face in a brief moment that Jack immediately recognized. He had expected an old man who was fearful, groveling for money or trembling at threats. But what he saw in Jack's eyes was something deep, dangerous, and unyielding that sent a chill running down his spine. as if he had just crossed an invisible line that no one had warned him about. He turned back to the car, signaling for his goons to retreat. His steps hurried compared to when he arrived, but Jack knew this was just the beginning. They would come back, with more people, more guns, and perhaps even a plan they thought was foolproof. But they didn't realize they had just awakened a monster, a ghost that had been dormant for far too long. He turned into the house, shutting the door with a sharp click, and sat down at the kitchen table, his hand resting on the map like a commander preparing for the final battle. Boomer lay at his feet, silent yet alert, his ears perked up as if waiting for a command from his utterly loyal owner. Jack sighed, mumbling to himself and the dog, "Maybe it's time to call the old crew, Boomer. They want war. They'll get war, but on my terms." The light from the oil lamp on the table flickered, casting dancing shadows across his face. The face of a man who had once been a ghost, and now that ghost was returning, ready to remind his enemies that there are monsters that should never be awakened, and when they do wake, nothing can hold them back. Jack Buck Larson stood silently on the porch, his eyes filled with sorrow as he watched the silhouettes of Victor, Blade, Morales' 3 black SUVs fade around a bend of the bumpy dirt road, leading away from a farm. The distant rumble of engines faded, leaving the Ironwood Valley in its familiar silence, with only the wind whistling through the old pines and the chirping of sparrows on the barn roof, providing an endless background melody. Boomer lay at his feet, ears perked up, bright brown eyes still alert even though the strangers had left. Jack sighed, gripping the oak walking stick he always took with him when checking the fences, his deep voice murmuring, "They'll be back, Boomer. And this time, they won't just be here to talk." He turned and stepped inside, the wooden door creaking shut behind him. Like closing a brief chapter piece to open up a battle, he felt deep in his bones. Inside the simple wooden house, the air still carried the faint scent of pine and the cold, stale coffee from the morning, a comforting aroma that Jack always found solace in during the peaceful days of Montana. He walked over to the kitchen table, where the map of the Ironwood Valley lay spread out under the dim light of the oil lamp hanging on the wall. The rough pencil line stood out like a reminder of what he had long prepared. The defensive points on the high ground to the north, offering a sweeping view of the valley, the shooting angles from the barn concealed by stacks of hay, the escape routes through the pine forest behind the house that he had walked hundreds of times to memorize. This wasn't just his home. It was a fortress designed by a ghost who had survived countless battles that no one dared to record in history. But now, he wasn't just protecting himself. Ellie Harper and the other folks in the valley neighbors he had come to know through every harvest season, every morning greeting at the little cafe in town, were also at risk. He couldn't let them fall into the hands of the cartel, just because they wanted to turn this place into a drug trafficking hub, a center of crime that he had sworn would never happen on American soil. Jack sat down on the old wooden chair that creaked under his weight, his hands tracing the symbols on the map, his eyes filled with a mix of nostalgia and determination. The cartel thought he was just a lonely old man, an easy target for them to swallow up with money or threats. They were wrong. He would let them come in, let them think they had the upper hand, and then turn this farm into a nightmare they would never escape from. "Bait," he murmured to Boomer, and the perfect trap. The dog tilted his head, as if understanding his intent, then lay down beside him, patiently waiting. He stood up and led Boomer to the back of the house, where a path wound down to a clearing near the small stream that babbled through the valley. The tire tracks were still clearly visible in the damp earth, deep and wide marks he had noticed since morning, not from Ellie's rickety pickup or the locals' delivery trucks. Jack knelt down, his hand brushing over mud, his eyes narrowing as he realized they belonged to a set of large tires, definitely from the black SUVs that Victor drove. "They've been scouting since last night," he said to Boomer, his voice low but sharp like the dagger he once wielded in close combat. "They're making plans, and they think I don't know." The dog let out a low growl in his throat, as if agreeing with his thoughts, then began to sniff around the area, its nose moving quickly as it searched for more clues. Jack stood up, his gaze shifting to the distant pine forest, where the thick canopies concealed a little-known path, a shortcut he used to take to check the western fence in the early days after he arrived. If the cartel came back, they wouldn't just take the main road like amateurs. They would try to sneak through the woods, thinking he wouldn't notice, believing he was just an old farmer who knew nothing but tilling the land. He smirked, a faint smile that was as cold as the winter wind sweeping through the valley. "Let them try," he murmured to himself. "They'll learn the price of going the wrong way, a price they'll never forget." Back in the barn, Jack opened the creaky wooden door and stepped into the dark space that had turned into the biggest secret hideout since the day he first set foot in Montana. He knelt down, lifting the false floor once more, the light from the small flashlight in his hand shining down into the armory below gleaming M4 rifles wrapped in protective oil, smoke grenades neatly stacked like in a military depot, a set of military communication gear still functioning well even after more than 2 decades, and a complete set of tactical knives he once used in close combat in Somalia when bullets were no longer an option. He pulled out an old radio, the kind the military used back in the 80s, turned it on, and listened to the crackling static before skillfully tuning the frequency with movements so practiced they were almost instinctive. This wasn't the first time he had used it since arriving in Montana. He had turned on a few times just to check, to hear the echoes of the past. But this time, it would carry a different meaning, a call he hoped he would never have to utter. "Jimmy, are you still there?" Jack said into the mic, his voice deep but steady as a rock. There was a brief silence. Then the raspy laughter of Jimmy Hawk, Russo echoed from the other end, bringing with it the familiarity of a man who had stood by him during the darkest days. "Jack, you old stubborn fool. I knew you'd call. What's up? Did the cartel come knocking at your door?" "They just left," Jack replied, holding the Phantom badge in the metal box, his rough fingers gliding over the engraved letters like an old ritual he had never forgotten. $3 million to buy my land. I turned them down, and they weren't too happy about it. They even threatened me, Jimmy. Jimmy whistled, his tone half joking, but Jack could hear the worry lurking beneath. $3 million? They really want that piece of land. Huh? I told you, Jack. They're swallowing up the whole valley. 7 farms in the past month, all right on their distribution route from the Mexican border straight up to Montana. You're the next target, and they're not kidding around. "I know," Jack said, his gaze fixed on the map spread out on the kitchen table as he returned home, his steps slow but steady. "They've been scouting since last night. The tire tracks are fresh, not from a local vehicle. I need you to do something for me. Jimmy, check how many of them there are, how many vehicles, and where they're located. I need accurate information as quickly as possible." "All right, buddy," Jimmy replied, his tone more serious as he realized Jack wasn't just checking in, but was actually planning for a real fight. "But what are you going to do? Take on the whole cartel by yourself? You're not the Phantom you used to be, Jack. You're 65 now, have you forgotten?" Jack smirked, a confident smile that Jimmy couldn't see through the radio waves. "I'm not alone, Jimmy, and Phantom has never left. It's just been sleeping, and now it's waking up." He turned off the radio, set it down on the table, and then turned to Boomer, gently patting the dog's head. "All right, buddy, let's go see what they left behind." Jack led Boomer out to the western field, where the fading light of day began to dim, casting long shadows over the golden grass. He spotted another trace, a hastily extinguished cigarette, but still smoldering with a few tiny embers on the ground. He picked it up, took a light sniff, then tossed it aside with a frown. "They've been here at least 10 minutes, he said to Boomer. "Watching my house, plotting, thinking I don't know a thing." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping across the field, his mind starting to sketch out a tactical picture, where they would attack from, how many there were, and how he would respond. He knew they weren't just coming with a couple of guys in suits and empty threats. They would be armed, maybe even with mercenaries, and they wouldn't hesitate to turn this farm into a pile of ashes if he didn't submit. Jack's heart began to race, not out of fear, but from adrenaline, the familiar rush before every battle, when all his senses sharpened to the point where he could hear the rustling leaves from hundreds of meters away or smell the gunpowder in the air before it ignited. He turned back to the house, walked into the kitchen, and pulled out an old wooden box from under the cabinet, a box he hadn't opened since the day he moved in. Inside were items he once thought he would never use again. A night vision goggles still with fresh batteries, a few small rolls of barbed wire he had used to set traps in Afghanistan, and a motion sensor he had taken from an abandoned military base during a mission in Iraq. He examined each piece, his hands moving slowly but precisely, like a hunter preparing his gear before heading into the deep woods. "They want to play," he muttered to himself. "Then I'll let them play on my terms." Tension escalated as dusk began to blanket the Ironwood Valley, the last rays of sunlight casting a brilliant golden hue over the wheat fields before surrendering to the darkness. Jack stood outside the barn, holding a roll of barbed wire, starting to set up small traps around farm enough to slow down anyone daring to cross the fence, but not lethal. He carefully concealed them under layers of dry grass and dirt, using small stones to hide the evidence, like a hunter laying traps for prey, without raising suspicion. Boomer followed closely, sniffing around everywhere, occasionally stopping to let out a soft bark when he discovered a corner Jack hadn't checked. "Good job, buddy," Jack said, giving the dog a gentle pat on the head. "We won't miss a spot." As the sun fully set, leaving the valley shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the faint moonlight hanging in the sky, Jack heard the distant sound of engines, a familiar noise. But this time it carried a more pronounced threat. He stood still, Boomer growling softly beside him, its ears perked up like radar. 3 black SUVs appeared once again, this time moving more slowly, their headlights off to avoid detection from afar, as if they were probing before a real attack. Victor stepped out, his confident demeanor now tinged with a hint of doubt, his cold eyes locked onto Jack from dozens of meters away. He stood at the gate, his voice echoing in the stillness like a declaration of war. "Mr. Larson, I told you to think carefully. Your time is up. Choose money or your life." Jack stood on the porch, still gripping the wooden stick, but now he was no longer playing the role of a gentle farmer. He stepped down, his leather boots crunching against the hard, cold ground under moonlight, his voice deep yet sharp, like a finely honed dagger. "I told you I'm not selling. You want to try and take it? Go ahead. But I warn you, my friend, you're stepping into a trap you won't be able to escape." Victor scoffed, but that smile couldn't hide the flicker of unease that flashed in his eyes for just a brief moment, which Jack immediately picked up on. "Old man, who do you think you are to say that? You think you can take us on all by yourself? You're out of your mind." He signaled to his goons, and 5 men stepped out of the car, hands tucked under their jackets, clearly ready with weapons, probably handguns or knives, the kind of things the cartel always carried as a silent threat. Jack smirked, a cold and dangerous smile, his eyes flashing with a glint that sent shivers down the spines of those who had faced Phantom before. "All alone? Not a chance," he said, his voice steady yet menacing. "I've got this whole valley backing me up, and you just poked the hornet's nest, my friend." He turned and walked into the house, leaving Victor standing there with a look of confusion mixed with doubt. But Jack knew this was just the beginning of the climax. He shut the door, the flickering light from the oil lamp on the kitchen table casting shadows on the map, now marked with several red dots indicating the traps. He had just set points that would turn into nightmares for anyone daring enough to cross them. He sat down, quickly picking up the radio and turning it on with a swift motion. "Jimmy, can you hear me?" he called out, his voice firm like command. Jimmy's voice crackled through after a few seconds of static, carrying a clear sense of worry, more pronounced than before. "I'm here, Jack. What's going on? Are they back?" "I need you to send a message to the old crew," Jack said, his eyes glued to the map, his mind already plotting for the upcoming battle down to the smallest detail. "The cartel wants to take my land. They have no idea who they're up against. Tell them Phantom needs them. One last time." Jimmy fell silent for a moment, then let out a raspy laugh, his voice tinged with a hint of disbelief. "Phantom, huh? I know you're not joking. All right, I'll call them. But Jack, are you sure? This isn't a game. They're a cartel, not some pathetic terrorists you've dealt with before." "I've never been more certain," Jack replied, gripping the radio tightly as if to tighten his resolve. "They want war. I'll give them war on my terms." He turned off the radio, set it down on the table, then stood up and stepped out onto the porch once more. Boomer stood beside him, ready like a loyal little soldier, his eyes shining with absolute trust in him. The tension peaked when Jack heard footsteps in the distance, not from the main road, but from the pine forest behind the house, where a hidden path lay beneath the thick canopy. He squinted. The darkness couldn't hide the 2 men creeping forward, guns in hand with silencers attached, moving stealthily like poachers in the night. They thought he wouldn't see them. Thought he wouldn't suspect a thing. Believed he was just an old man dozing off in his armchair at home. Jack smirked, muttering to Boomer, "They're starting to make their move." He quietly slipped into the shadows of the barn, gripping a tactical dagger from the armory, the blade glinting with a cold light under the moon. He moved as swiftly as a ghost, without a sound, approaching the two men from behind with a speed that even he was surprised he still possessed after all these years. A quick strike to the neck with the hilt of the knife sent the first man crashing down without a sound, his body collapsing onto the dry grass like a heavy sack. The second man turned around, his eyes wide with shock, but it was too late. The blade was pressed against his throat, and Jack's voice whispered coldly in his ear, "Wrong turn, buddy. Time to sleep." He executed a precise chokehold, rendering the man unconscious in 3 seconds flat, then bound both of them with barbed wire from the trap, hiding them behind a pile of dry hay in the barn like two freshly hunted prey. Jack's breathing was now more even, the adrenaline having fully awakened him, as if he had just emerged from a long sleep to reclaim his true self-phantom, the specter of the battlefield. He turned back toward the house, his steps light yet resolute. He knew the cartel wouldn't stop here. They would come back, with greater numbers, armed to the teeth, and with the confidence that they could crush him. But he was ready. His farm was not just a home. It was a perfect trap, designed to swallow anyone who dared to step inside uninvited. He sat down at the kitchen table once more, his hand resting on the map, his eyes glinting with a cold light that those who had faced it before had come to fear. "They want to play," he muttered to Boomer. "Then I'll play to the end, and they won't like how it turns out." The tension eased as Jack stood up, stepped out onto the porch, and gazed up at the starry sky of Montana, sparkling like an endless tapestry. He took a deep breath, feeling the biting cold air fill his lungs, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth that he loved. Tonight was the last night of peace, and he knew that better than anyone, but he wasn't afraid. He was ready to turn this valley into a battleground, and the cartel would soon realize they weren't just facing an old farmer, but a ghost, a living nightmare they couldn't escape from, a man who had made even more dangerous foes beg for mercy. He gently patted Boomer's head, whispering, "Get ready, buddy. The fun is about to begin." After dealing with the two spies lurking in the shadows of the barn, Jack Buck Larson stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the starry Montana sky, with a faint moonlight spilled over the Ironwood Valley like a shimmering silver veil. The wind howled through the old pines, blending with his steady breaths, carrying the biting chill of the late night as a reminder that peace had officially left this place. Boomer lay beside him, ears perked up, his bright brown eyes alert like a loyal little soldier never leaving his post. Jack gently patted the dog's head, his deep voice whispering, "The fun is about to begin, buddy. And this time, we won't be playing alone." He stepped inside, the wooden door closing with sharp click, sealing off a long day to usher in a night he knew would change everything. The cartel had ignited a war, and Jack understood that even as the once invincible Phantom, he couldn't take on an entire crime organization that was devouring the Ironwood Valley like a starving beast. He needed his old brothers, the comrades who had stood by him through fire and bullets, those for whom the name Phantom was not just a nickname, but a vow of life and death together. Inside the humble wooden house, the light from the oil lamp hanging on the wall flickered weakly, casting a glow on the Ironwood Valley map, now marked with countless pencil dots indicating traps around the fence, shooting angles from a barn, and escape routes to the pine forest that he had prepared the night before. Jack settled into the old wooden chair that creaked under his weight, holding the battered military radio he had just used to contact Jimmy Hawk Russo, an old friend from the investigative police with sun-bleached hair and a smile that was half joking, half serious. His message still echoed in his mind. Phantom needs him. One last time. He took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline still coursing through him after the brief encounter with two spies of feeling he had lived with through countless sleepless nights on distant battlefields. But he knew this was just a prelude, a glance from the enemy before they unleashed their real strike. Victor, Blade, Morales, and the cartel would be back, and this time they would come an army armed and confident that they could crush him like an ant beneath their boot. Jack needed his team, those who had turned impossible missions into legends, the ones he trusted more than himself. The stillness of the night was shattered by the distant sound of an engine, not the cold growl of a pack of black SUVs, but more familiar, intimate noise, like a vivid memory rushing back from the past. Jack stood up and stepped out onto the porch, Boomer barking softly in greeting, his tail wagging gently in the crisp air. Under the moonlight, an old black pickup rolled slowly down the dirt road, leading to the farm, dust swirling behind it like a curtain obscuring the weak glow of the headlights. Jack's lips curled into a slight smile, a rare expression breaking through the rugged lines of his face, bringing a touch of warmth amidst the chill of Montana. He recognized that vehicle instantly. It belonged to Tommy Rifle Callahan, the best sharpshooter he had ever known, who once hit a target from a mile away in the pitch-black night of Afghanistan, when the fog was so thick that no one believed he could see anything beyond the darkness. The pickup truck came to a stop at the gate, and Tommy stepped out, tall and lean, his salt and pepper hair tousled by the wind, and his piercing blue eyes cold as steel eyes that had made enemies tremble with just a glance. He carried a long black case, his beloved sniper rifle, which he affectionately called Old Lady, because it had been with him through countless battlefields from the Middle East to South America. "Jack, you stubborn old man," Tommy called out, his voice gravelly with a familiar hint of sarcasm that Jack always found comforting. "Jimmy called me while I was drowning my sorrows in a dive bar 300 miles away. He said you're in trouble with the cartel and need a team. I thought you were retired, living the farmer's life with coffee and barley, huh?" Jack stepped down the stairs and shook Tommy's hand with a firm grip, feeling like he was back in the old days when they used to sit around a campfire at some secret base. "Retirement doesn't mean death, Tommy," he replied, his voice deep but laced with a rare humor, just like the way he used a joke with a team to lighten the tense moments before a battle. "The cartel wants to take my land. They think I'm just some old man easy to deal with, just digging in the dirt and raising chickens. I need my brothers to teach them a lesson they won't forget." Tommy laughed loudly, his laughter echoing in the stillness of the night, then slapped Jack on the shoulder hard enough that he had to steady himself. "Teach them a lesson, huh? Like in Colombia? When you turn an entire gang to ash in just one night, while I took out the boss from half a mile away without even needing a flashlight." He set the gun case down on the ground, opening it with the care one would use to unwrap a precious gift, revealing the meticulously maintained M24 inside, its barrel gleaming, the protective oil still fresh despite having fired thousands of rounds. "If you want to play, I'm ready. But are you sure I'm enough on my own? These cartels aren't just some second-rate terrorists." Before Jack could respond, another sound echoed from the pine forest the growl of a Jeep engine, accompanied by the strains of old rock music blaring from vehicle speakers, resonating through the thick canopy like a wordless greeting. A muddy Jeep Wrangler rolled out from the trail Jack used to set his traps, and he instantly knew who it was. Danny Boom Grayson jumped out of the driver's seat, his bushy goatee covering nearly half his face, and that unmistakable mischievous grin shining under the moonlight. Danny had been the team's explosives expert, the guy who could turn anything into a bomb from a rusty soda can to an enemy armor vehicle, and he always did it with the glee of a kid playing with fireworks. He lugged a heavy bag, surely packed with the toys he loved more than his own life. "Jack, my old man," Danny shouted, rushing over to hug Jack so tightly that he nearly knocked him down the stairs, his laughter echoing like the loud bang he always made. "Jimmy called me while I was fishing in Wyoming, thinking I'd say no, but when I heard you need a crew, I jumped in my truck and sped over. I brought some fireworks too, just in case you want to blow things up like we used to in Iraq." Jack chuckled softly, patting Danny on the shoulder with a look that was both affectionate and cautionary. "Watch out, Boom. I don't want my farm to turn into a pile of ashes, but I need your talent. The cartel won't come alone, they'll bring their guns and the confidence that they can crush me." Tension began to rise as a third vehicle appeared, a dusty sedan rolling in from the south, its dim headlights slicing through the darkness like a knife through the night. Jack squinted, recognizing the petite but quick figure stepping out of the car. Sarah Whisper Bennett, the team's communications expert who had once hacked into the enemy's communication system in under 5 minutes in Iraq, helping the team escape an ambush that no one thought they could survive. Sarah pushed her glasses up her nose, her brown hair neatly tied back, cradling the old laptop she always carried with her like an inseparable part of her body. "Jack," she called, her voice soft yet as solid as steel. carrying the calm assurance of someone who always had everything under control. "Jimmy said you're in big trouble. I checked a few frequencies on my way here. There's a cartel moving in, and they've got a small army. What do you need me to do?" Jack nodded, his eyes lighting up as he watched his team gradually come together, like pieces of a perfect fighting machine from the past. "I need you to keep your ears open, Sarah," he said, his voice deep but sharp. "Find out how many of them there are, how many vehicles they have, and what they plan to do. They've been scouting me since last night, and I need to know their plan before they get here." Finally, the sound of fourth engine roared to life as an old but sturdy silver SUV rolled slowly in from the east along the gravelly dirt road. Jack immediately recognized it as Mike Doc Harper, the team's battlefield medic, who had patched up wounds that no one thought could be saved, from gunshot wounds to life-threatening blood loss in the desert. Mike stepped out, his silver hair tousled across his forehead, his gentle yet sharp eyes scanning the battlefield like a hawk, holding the medical bag he had never parted with since enlisting. "Jack," he said, his voice warm and steady like an older brother in the team, "Jimmy said you needed the crew, and I couldn't let you play alone. But I hope you're not planning to turn this farm into a field hospital." "Huh?" Jack chuckled softly, shaking Mike's hand with a firm grip, feeling the absolute trust he always brought. "Not a chance, Doc," he replied. "But I need you to keep us alive. The cartel won't play nice, they'll come at us with everything they've got." For people stood on Jack's porch under the moonlight, with Boomer running around, barking softly to greet the familiar faces he had seen during their rare visits to the farm before. This was his team, the ones who had stood by him against terrorists in the Middle East, drug cartels in South America, and rebels in Africa on missions that no one dared to put on paper. They were not just teammates. They were brothers, the ones he trusted with his life, the ones he had led through fire and bullets, always bringing them back safe or at least alive. Tommy Rifle Callahan, with his sniper rifle so accurate it was terrifying, had taken out a terrorist leader through 3 layers of glass on a rainy night in Baghdad. Danny Boom Grayson, with a knack for blowing things up, had turned a tank into scrap metal in Somalia with just one homemade bomb. Sarah Whisper Bennett, with her ability to turn information into a weapon, had saved the whole team from an airstrike by hacking into the enemy's communications. And Mike Doc Harper, with his life-saving hands teetering on the edge of life and death, had stitched Jack's wounds in a bunker while bombs rained down above. They had once been known as the Ghosts of Phantom, a legendary special ops team whose name struck fear into hearts of enemies, whispered in the dark. "All right," Jack said, his voice dropping, carrying the weight of a leader who had guided his team through the darkest days. "Listen up. The cartel, led by a guy named Victor Morales, wants to take my land to turn this valley into a drug distribution hub. They've swallowed up 7 farms in the last month, and now they're targeting me. I've set a few small traps around here, taking care of 2 scouts tonight, but they'll be back, stronger. I need you guys to turn this farm into a battleground, not just to protect my land, but to defend this entire valley, to protect people like Ellie Harper and the families who have no way to fight back against them." Tommy nodded, his hand caressing the rifle with clear affection. "I can set up a few shooting points on the northern hill. The view from there is so clear that no one can pass without me seeing them. Give me an hour, and I'll turn that place into my own fortress." Danny grinned widely, opening his bag to reveal several blocks of C4, wires, and even a smoke grenade he had picked up from somewhere. "I'm going to turn the main road into a little non-lethal minefield, just enough to make them panic and scatter like chickens. Do you want a big bang or a smaller one, Jack? I can do both." "Not too loud," Jack replied, shooting Danny a warning glance but unable to hide a faint smile. "I still want this house to stand strong after we're done. Boom. Don't go overboard like in Somalia. I really don't want to have to rebuild from scratch." Sarah opened her laptop, her fingers gliding swiftly over the keyboard like a pianist playing a beautiful melody, the blue light from the screen illuminating her face. "I'm going to hack into their frequency," she said, her voice calm yet brimming with confidence. "If they're using radio or phone, I'll know where they are and what they're planning. Give me 2 hours, and I'll have their entire plan right here on the screen." Mike set down the medical bag and quickly checked a few supplies. Needles, bandages, morphine with the careful precision of a doctor who had worked under fire. "I'm going to set up a medical station in the house," he said. "If things get bad, at least we won't all bleed out. But Jack, you better not make me have to handle the whole team like I did in Iraq. I'm not as quick as I used to be." The tension peaked when Sarah looked up from her laptop, her voice urgent, slicing through the silence in the kitchen. "Jack, I just picked up a signal. They're gathering at the old Thompson farm, 5 miles south. 20 people, 8 vehicles. A few heavy guns could be machine guns or RPGs. They plan to attack before dawn, probably in about 4 hours. Jack nodded, his eyes flashing with a cold light that his team recognized immediately, the same look Phantom had when entering a battle, as if everything was a chess game where he was always several moves ahead. "So they couldn't wait 24 hours, he said, his voice deep but sharp as the dagger he had just used to take down 2 scouts. "All right then. They want to come early. They'll get an early surprise." He turned to the team, issuing orders with the same swift precision he had back in the dusty outposts around the world. "Tommy, head to the North Hill right now and pick the highest spot, lock down the main road. Danny, set traps on the main road, but keep it under wraps. I don't want them to know until it's too late. Sarah, keep your ears open. I need to know every move they make, every word they say. Mike, get ready inside. If anyone gets hurt, you're the only one I'm counting on. We have 4 hours to turn this place into the perfect trap." The team nodded, without a word wasted, then dispersed like shadows in night, each person fully aware of their role, just as they had in hundreds of missions before that no one but them would remember. Tommy slung his rifle over his shoulder and vanished into the darkness of the northern hill, moving with the swift grace of a hunting leopard. Danny hummed an old AC/DC rock song, carrying the C4 bag down the main road, his figure bouncing under the moonlight like a kid ready to play. Sarah sat in the kitchen, the laptop glowing in front of her, headphones snugly in place, her fingers tapping away like a little storm. Mike laid out the medical supplies on the table, checking each vial with the calmness of someone who had seen every imaginable wound. Jack stood on the porch, his hand resting on Boomer's shoulder, watching his team operate with familiar feeling rising in his chest, the feeling of a leader guiding his brothers through fire and bullets, a sensation he thought had been buried beneath the soil of Montana. He recalled a night in Colombia when his team raided a drug compound deep in the jungle, just 5 men against 50 heavily armed enemies. Tommy took out the leader from half a mile away in the pouring rain. Danny blew up the supply depot with a homemade bomb made from a gas can. Sarah cut off their communications by hacking into the radio system, and Mike kept them alive when a bullet grazed Jack's shoulder. That night, they left like ghosts, leaving behind a legend that the South American criminal underworld still whispers about in fear to this day. The tension eased as Jack stepped into the house, sitting down at the kitchen table, his hand resting on the map like a commander making a final check of the battlefield before the big moment. He took a deep breath, feeling the chilly Montana air fill his lungs, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth that he loved. His team was ready. This farm was no longer just a home. It was a meticulously prepared battleground, and the cartel would soon realize they were not just up against an old farmer, but a legendary special ops team that had never known defeat, a team whose name, Phantom, was not just a memory, but final warning before everything came to an end. He looked at Boomer, whispering to the dog as if speaking to himself. "We're going to give them a night to remember, buddy, a night they'll never forget, and if we're lucky, they'll never dare to come back." The sky over Montana stretched across the Ironwood Valley, the stars twinkling like the eyes of old soldiers watching Jack Buck Larson from afar. In the humble wooden cabin, the flickering light from the oil lamp cast a weak glow on the kitchen table, illuminating a map of the valley that had become a tactical maze filled with hasty pencil markings of traps, firing angles, and escape routes that his team had painstakingly prepared after 4 tense hours. Boomer lay at Jack's feet, ears perked up in alertness, his bright brown eyes gazing out the window as if he too sensed the approaching storm. Jack stood there, hand resting on the table, his contemplative gaze sweeping over every detail on the map, the adrenaline from the encounter with the 2 scouts still simmering in his veins. But now, it was no longer just a feeling of a lone soldier. It was a fire of a commander leading his legendary Special Forces team into a battle he knew would determine the fate of the farm, and perhaps the entire Ironwood Valley. Sarah, whisper, Bennett sat at the table, her face illuminated by the blue light from her laptop screen, headphones snugly in place, her fingers flying over the keyboard like an artist conducting a symphony of war. "Jack," she said, her voice urgent yet maintaining the calm of a communications expert who had faced pressure in smoke-filled bunkers in Iraq. "They're on the move. 20 people, 8 vehicles, just like I reported earlier. They just left the Thompson farm, 5 miles south. I caught a few keywords: machine guns, RPG. They're not looking to negotiate. Jack. ETA is about 30 minutes. She looked up, her eyes behind her glasses shining with a mix of worry and determination, as if she was ready to turn information into the sharpest weapon in his hands. Jack nodded, his eyes glued to the map, his mind operating like a tactical machine rebooted after 2 decades of silence beneath the facade of a simple farmer. 30 minutes, he muttered, tracing the main road leading into farm, the very road where Danny Boom Grayson had set his explosives, where Tommy Rifle Callahan was lying in wait on the northern hill with his beloved sniper rifle. They're coming sooner than I thought. Good. The more rushed they are, the more mistakes they'll make. He turned to Sarah, his voice low but sharp as the dagger he once wielded in close combat in Somalia. Stay in touch with me over the radio. Whisper. I need to know every move they make, every vehicle, every word Victor Morales says over the airwaves. He's the brains behind this operation, and I want to take that head out before he can come up with any more schemes. Sarah nodded, turning back to her laptop with the speed of someone who had once saved her entire team from an airstrike by hacking into the enemy's communication system in just 5 minutes. Jack stepped outside, the biting cold air of the Montana night hitting his face like a gentle slap in the past, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth that he always found solace in during peaceful days. Now, that smell mingled with the tension of an impending battle. He held the small radio in his hand, turned it on, and the crackling static filled the air like a prelude before Tommy's voice came through the waves, cold and precise like his gunfire. Jack, this is Rifle. I'm in position on the North Hill. Clear sight on the main road, right under my crosshairs. When do you want to fire? Not yet, Tommy, Jack replied, his voice steady but authoritative, just like the way he used to lead the team through the dark alleys of Baghdad. Wait for my signal. Let them get in deep. I want them to think they have the upper hand, to believe I'm just an old man sitting around waiting to die in my house. He switched the channel, calling Danny with a faint smile flickering across his lips. Boom! How's your trap looking? Danny's raspy laughter crackled through the radio, accompanied by the soft clinking of metal as he checked the final wires. Ready to go, old man. I've set 3 small charges along the main road, nothing lethal, but enough to send them scrambling like headless chickens. Just say the word blast, and I'll give them a fireworks show Montana style. Danny still had that playful banter he used to have back in the day when he blew up a tank in Somalia just to prove he could. Jack smirked, a cold smile flickering across his face, carrying a rare hint of humor amidst the life and death stakes. All right, boom. Wait for my signal, and don't overdo it. Huh? I still want this house standing after all this is over. He turned off the radio and gazed out at the field stretching before his home, where the moonlight bathed the golden grass like a shimmering silver carpet under the night sky. His farm looked peaceful, harmless, exactly the bait he wanted the cartel to see before they stepped into the nightmare he and his team had meticulously prepared. They would be confident they could crush him, thinking he was just an old man living alone in the prairie, and then they would realize their mistake when it was too late to back out. Tension escalated as the distant engine sounds grew clearer. No longer just a vague noise in the wind, but the growl of black SUVs cutting through the darkness like predators closing in on their prey. Jack stood on the porch, Boomer growling softly beside him, its ears perked up like radar detecting enemies from miles away. He turned on the radio, and Sarah's voice came through immediately, urgent yet composed. Jack, they're within 2 miles. 8 vehicles, split into 2 groups. The main group is on the main road, 6 vehicles. I heard Victor order the machine gun mounted on the lead truck. The smaller group, 2 vehicles, is circling through the woods to the west, probably to cut off your escape route. They're moving fast 20 minutes until they arrive. Jack nodded. even though Sarah couldn't see it through the radio waves. A cold glint flickered in his eyes as he traced the forest path in his mind. "They're smarter than I thought," he muttered to himself, then spoke into the radio with a deep, commanding voice. "Rifle, your team has a main road in sight, but hold your fire. Boom! Set the trap on the main road. I want them stuck when they come through. Whisper, stay close to the team in the woods. I'll handle them first. Doc, be ready inside. If anyone gets hurt, you're the one I'm counting on." He stepped down the stairs, his leather boots crunching on the hard, cold ground under the moonlight, his hand gripping the tactical knife he had used to take down the 2 scouts earlier, the blade gleaming like a silent warning. He moved swiftly like a shadow, heading toward the pine forest of the west, where the cartel's small group was stealthily approaching, unaware that they had fallen into Phantom's crosshairs. In the forest, the darkness enveloped everything like a thick black curtain, with only the moonlight filtering through the dense canopy, casting faint patches of light on the ground covered in dry leaves. Jack knelt behind a large pine tree, his ears straining to catch the footsteps and whispers of 5 men about 50 meters away, their voices speaking in Spanish, urgent yet trying to keep quiet. They moved cautiously, handguns equipped with silencers gripped tightly, their steps stealthy like poachers in the night, clearly the advance team sent by Victor Blade Morales to trap him from behind. Jack smirked, muttering to Boomer, who lay still beside him. "They think they're being sneaky, huh? Wrong move." He signaled for the dog to stay put, then quietly crept closer, his figure blending into shadows like a part of the forest, not a sound escaping from his old leather boots. The tension peaked as Jack was right behind the 2 guys at the back of the line, just a few feet apart, but they had no idea he was there, not hearing his steady breathing or the soft sound of the knife sliding out of its sheath. He lunged forward like lightning, delivering a swift blow with the hilt of the knife to the first guy's neck, dropping him without a sound, his body collapsing onto dry leaves like a heavy sack. The soft thud drowned out by the wind. The second guy turned around, his eyes wide with shock in the darkness, but Jack had already pressed the blade against his throat before he could raise his gun, his voice a chilling whisper in the guy's ear. "Don't scream, buddy. Just sleep." A precise choke hold, quick and smooth like a move he had executed hundreds of times on the battlefield, rendered the guy unconscious in 3 seconds flat, his legs buckling like a puppet with its strings cut. Jack dragged both of them into the bushes, tying them up tightly with barbed wire from the trap he had stashed in his bag, then moved on, his eyes locked on the 3 remaining guys ahead. The radio crackled in his ear, Tommy's voice urgent yet maintaining the coolness of a sharpshooter. "Jack, the main group is heading down the main road, 200 meters from Boom's trap. They got a .50 cal machine gun on the lead vehicle, and it doesn't look good. Do you want to take the shot?" Jack paused, hiding behind another tree, his breath steady even though his heart raced a little faster. He quickly replied over the radio, "Not yet, Rifle. Wait for Boom to go off first. I want them disoriented. I just took out 2 guys in the woods, and there are 3 more. I'll handle them right now." He turned off the radio, his gaze locked on the 3 figures ahead, listening to them whisper in Spanish, probably reporting to Victor through the small radio clipped to his shoulder, unaware that Sarah had hacked into their frequency from hundreds of meters away. Jack burst out again, this time faster and more ruthless. The closest guy took a direct punch to the temple, the blow so powerful that he collapsed to the ground, unconscious in an instant with a small grunt. The second guy turned around, raising his gun, but Jack kicked hard at his knee, causing him to buckle in pain, and then a second punch to the chin ended any resistance. The last guy, taller than the other 2, managed to react by lunging at Jack with a knife in hand, but Jack sidestepped, using the guy's own momentum to lock his arm and twist his wrist backward, making the knife clatter to the ground. A final chokehold sent him off to dreamland, and Jack stood there, breathing steadily among the 5 guys sprawled out in the bushes, not a sound to alert the main group to what had just happened. He muttered to Boomer, 5 down, plenty more to go. The tension eased as Jack returned near the house, hiding behind the barn, turning on the radio to check in with the team. Whisper, the crew in the woods took out 5 guys. No survivors to report. Update me on the main road. Sarah's voice came through immediately, carrying a mix of relief and anxiety. Jack, The main group is walking right into Boom's trap about 50 meters ahead. Victor's in the middle vehicle. Just order the machine gun set up and ready to strike. They think you don't know they're coming their way too confident. Jack smirked, a cold smile flickering across his face, his eyes shining under the moonlight like a predator that had just taken down its first prey. "Good," he said into the radio, his voice low and menacing. "Boom! Get ready to blow when I say so. I want them thrown into chaos right from the first shot. Rifle, lock on the target, but wait for me to take aim at the machine gun first. Doc, be ready inside. The real battle is about to begin." He stood still, Boomer beside him, waiting in the darkness with the patience of a ghost that had instilled fear in enemies for decades. The fight on the main road was about to erupt, and Jack knew this would be a welcome the cartel and Victor, Blade, Morales would never forget. The deep darkness enveloping Ironwood Valley now trembled with the growl of 8 black SUVs. Steel Predators slowly rolling down the main road, leading to Jack Buck Larson's farm. He stood behind the horse barn, hidden in the shadows, with Boomer lying still beside him, ears perked up like radar, waiting for command from the owner he trusted completely. Jack had just dealt with a group of 5 guys in the woods to the west, 5 now lying unconscious in the underbrush, tightly bound with barbed wire. Not a sound to alert the others to what had just happened. He held the radio, his deep voice crackling through the waves as he made one last check with the team, his breath steady, but his eyes glinting with a cold light under the moon, the gaze of Phantom, the ghost of the battlefield, the one the cartel was about to face without a clue. "Boom, are you ready?" Jack asked, gripping the radio tightly, feeling the adrenaline surge through his body like the old days when he stood amidst the smoke and fire in Columbia. "Danny, Boom." Grayson's gravelly laugh came through immediately, brimming with uncontained excitement. "Ready to roll, old man. 3 little bombs are just sitting under the road, and the moment you say blast, I'll give them a Montana-style show they'll never forget." Jack nodded, even though Danny couldn't see him over the airwaves, then switched channels with a quick flick. "Rifle, what do you see from the North Hill?" "Tommy," Rifle Callahan's voice rang out, cold and precise like the shot that had taken down a terrorist leader through 3 layers of glass in Baghdad. "I see it all, Jack. The lead vehicle's got a .50 cal machine gun mounted on top, and it doesn't look good. Victor's in the middle vehicle, barking orders over the radio, telling his goons to get ready to wipe everything out. They think you don't stand a chance, old man." "Good," Jack said, his gaze locked on the main road, where the moonlight glinted off the glossy black paint of the approaching SUVs. "Whisper, give me an update." "Sarah, whisper." Bennett's voice crackled to the radio from the kitchen, urgent yet maintaining the calm of someone who had turned information into a life-saving weapon for the whole team. "Jack, they're right at the trap line, just 20 meters away from crossing. Victor just ordered to wipe everything out. They're not looking to negotiate. They just want to burn the farm, and you along with it." Jack smirked, a dangerous smile flickering across his rugged face, carrying the confidence of a man who had once made enemies tremble at the mere mention of the name Phantom. "They want to burn it all down, huh?" he muttered, then spoke into the radio with a deep, commanding voice. "Boom! Detonate as soon as the lead vehicle crosses the trigger point. I want them thrown into chaos from the very first shot. Rifle, aim for machine guns after the blast don't kill, just incapacitate. Keep them pinned down. Doc, be ready inside in case anyone gets hurt. You're the one I'm counting on. Let's get this started." He stood still, Boomer growling softly beside him, both waiting for the moment when his team would turn the cartel's confidence into fear and chaos. Tension escalated as the engine noise grew louder, closer, the sound of tires grinding against the hard-packed earth echoing through quiet Montana night. Jack watched from behind the barn, the moonlight glinting off the lead SUV as it rolled over the trap, where Danny had placed a series of small C4 charges cleverly hidden beneath the dirt and dry grass, just enough to cause a disruption that the cartel wouldn't see coming, but not enough to completely destroy anything. He counted down in his head. 3, 2, 1. He pressed the radio button, his deep voice booming like an unarguable command. "Boom, blow it." A deafening explosion shattered the night, and the ground shook violently as the first C4 detonated right beneath the lead SUV, sending it careening to the side, in a whirlwind of dust and thick black smoke. The sound of shattering glass and clashing metal rang out like a chaotic symphony, accompanied by the shocked screams of the cartel as the second vehicle slammed into the first in a panic, its tires skidding across the loose earth. Instantly, the sharp crack of Tommy Rifle Callahan's sniper rifle echoed from the northern hill, a precise shot striking the .50 cal machine gun mounted on the roof of the lead vehicle, silencing it before it could fire a single round at the farm. "Machine guns down," Tommy reported over the radio, his voice icy, carrying the confidence of a marksman who had never missed his target. Jack moved out of the horse stable, hiding behind a pile of dry hay near the fence, watching the main group of the cartel burst out of the vehicle in a frenzy of uncontrolled panic. Victor Blade Morales stepped down from the middle car, his face twisted with rage, his cold eyes scanning the field, as if searching for the one who had ruined his perfect plan. He shouted in Spanish, "Where are they? Find them now, shoot them all." But before his henchmen could form a line, Danny's second C4 exploded under the third vehicle, flipping it over to its side, black smoke rising like a beast growling in the dark night, obscuring their vision. Jack turned on the radio, the voice booming through the chaos of explosions and screams, deep yet sharp like a knife slicing through the air. "Rifle, aim for the tires to keep them pinned down. Boom, the last one as they try to retreat. I want them with nowhere to run." He dashed out from his hiding spot, moving as swiftly as a shadow across the field, heading toward the cartel group, trying to regroup amid the smoke and flames. He spotted Victor commanding his henchmen, ordering them to set up a defensive barrier with the intact SUVs. But they had no idea that every move they made was already under Jack's team's control, from Tommy's precise shot on the northern hill to the clever traps Danny had set. The climax of the battle came when Jack approached a machine gunner standing near the last vehicle in the formation, a tall guy with a scarred face, gripping his AK like it was the only thing keeping him steady in the chaos. Jack charged from the shadows, quick as lightning, delivering a powerful punch to the guy's jaw that sent him sprawling backward, the gun clattering to the ground with sharp thud before he could even pull the trigger. The second guy nearby turned around, raising his handgun with trembling hands. But Jack swiftly kicked him hard in the knee, dropping him to the ground in pain, then locked him out cold with a quick move he had used hundreds of times on the battlefields of the Middle East. He picked up the AK from the first guy, checked the magazine with a quick glance, then tossed it into the bushes a few meters away, not wanting to leave any weapons behind that the cartel could grab in the chaos. Jack hid behind a broken SUV, watching Victor scream in a fit of uncontrolled rage. "We outnumber them. Attack. Shoot that old man." He stood behind a middle vehicle, radio in hand, his face flushed with anger and confusion, clearly not expecting that an old farmer could turn his perfectly planned assault into chaos in less than 3 minutes. But Victor's words were cut short when Danny's last C4 exploded with a blast louder than the two before it, right under the last vehicle in the formation, creating a wall of fire and thick smoke that completely blocked their escape route. The vehicle flipped over, wheels spinning uselessly in the air, and Victor's goons screamed in panic as they realized they were trapped in the field. Tommy's voice crackled through the radio, cold and certain. "The two-wheel drive is done, Jack. They're stuck and can't go anywhere." Jack smirked, turning up the radio with a chilling grin. "Good, Rifle. Keep them in your sights if anyone tries to run, but don't kill them, just make them stop." He moved on, getting closer to Victor through the thick smoke, hearing him scream over the radio that Sarah had hacked from inside the house. "Retreat! Retreat now!" But there was no way out. Danny's trap had them locked in tight, and Tommy's shots turned every attempt to escape into a hopeless endeavor. Jack rose from his hiding spot, stepping out of the shadows, the dagger in his hand glinting in the moonlight. His deep voice rang out amidst the smoke and the screams of the crumbling cartel. "Victor Morales," he called out, his tone slicing through the air like a sharp blade. "You've picked the wrong guy to fight. Back down now, or you won't have anyone left to give orders." Victor turned around, his eyes wide with shock as he saw Jack standing there, a grizzled old man in a flannel shirt and worn-out boots, but the look in his eyes was that of a predator who had locked onto its prey. Victor roared, his face twisted in a mix of fear and furious defiance. "Who are you? How can an old man do this?" He raised his pistol, his hand trembling, but Jack merely smirked. stepping closer with the calmness of a ghost that had once made enemies beg for mercy in places where light never shone. "I am Phantom, my friend," he replied, his voice deep yet resonant like a death sentence. "And you just stepped into my territory." The tension eased as the cartel began to completely fall apart. A few guys tried to run toward the forest of the west, but Tommy's warning shots rang out from a northern hill, the bullets hitting the ground right in front of them, making them turn back with their hands raised in panic. Victor stood there, panting amidst the smoke, his wild eyes darting around as he realized he had completely lost control. The gang that once outnumbered him tenfold was now just a bunch of terrified individuals, either fleeing or begging for their lives. He shouted one last time, his voice cracking with rage and helplessness. "You think this is over? We'll come back stronger with more numbers." Jack stopped a few meters away from Victor, the dagger in his hand reflecting the moonlight like a silent warning. He smirked, his cold gaze locked onto Victor, as if he could see straight through his soul. "Go ahead, give it a try," he said, his deep voice dripping with menace. "But next time, I won't go easy on you, and you won't get another chance to run." He turned away, Boomer closely following, leaving Victor standing amidst the surrendering henchmen, smoke and fire still smoldering around the wrecked SUVs. The first battle had ended a crushing victory for Jack's team, but he knew this was just the beginning of a larger war, a war in which the cartel would return with everything they had, and he and his team would need to be ready for the next showdown. If your heart races as Jack and his team turn clever traps into nightmares of cartel, hit like to celebrate the fighting spirit of a veteran who never backs down, and subscribe to the channel now, so you don't miss out on the epic action from the true heroes of America. The dust from the first battle still hung in the cold air of Ironwood Valley. Shattered black SUVs scattered across the main road, leading to Jack Buck Larson's farm like the carcasses of hunted beasts in the dead of night. The pale moonlight cast a ghostly glow over the chaotic scene, illuminating the shadowy figures of Victor, Blade, Morales' men, some kneeling in surrender with their hands raised, while others lay unconscious in the fields after precise warning shots from Tommy Rifle Callahan on the northern hill. Jack stood there, just a few meters from Victor, a dagger glinting in his hand under the moonlight like a silent warning. His voice, deep and sharp, cut through the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and smoke. "Go ahead, try it. But next time, I won't go easy on you, and you won't get a chance to run." He turned away, Boomer close at his side, leaving Victor standing among his defeated men, his eyes burning with a mix of rage and confusion as he realized he had just faced someone he couldn't begin to comprehend. Jack stepped into the house, the wooden door closing with a sharp click, leaving a heavy silence that enveloped the farm. He sat down at the kitchen table, the light from the oil lamp flickering across the map of the valley, now marked with several red dot locations where his team had just taken down the cartel in under 10 minutes. Boomer lay at his feet, ears perked up in alert, as if he sensed that the battle wasn't truly over. "Sarah, whisper," Bennett looked up from her laptop, her voice relieved yet tinged with worry. "Jack, they're pulling back, or rather, what's left of them." Victor just shouted over the radio, telling the crew to regroup at the Thompson farm. But I caught a few words. "Phantasma, new forces, they're not giving up." Jack nodded, his gaze thoughtfully sweeping over the map, his fingers tracing the route from the farm to the cartel's meeting point. "Phantasma," he murmured, his voice deep as if recalling a name from the past. "He's the one behind Victor. I've heard that name before. A notorious guy in South America, brutal and more in love with violence than money. If he shows up, we won't just be facing Victor's goons anymore." He stood up and stepped out onto the porch, the biting cold of Montana hitting his face, carrying the lingering scent of smoke from Danny Boone Grayson's explosions. The first battle was won, but Jack knew Victor was just a pawn, and the real mastermind was about to make his entrance. Tension escalated as the radio crackled to life again, Tommy Rifle Callahan's cold voice cutting through the air from the northern hill. "Jack, I see movement to the south, about 5 miles out near the Thompson farm. More vehicles than last time, at least 15. And there's something big. Could be an armored vehicle or a helicopter. What do you want me to do?" Jack furrowed his brow, gripping the radio tightly. His gaze locked onto the darkness to the south where the headlights began to flicker like tiny flames in the night. "Hold your position, Rifle," he replied, Keep an eye on them and report back. I need to know what they're bringing. Whisper. Keep an ear on the frequency. If it's Phantasma, I want to know what he's saying. Sarah tuned into the new frequency on her laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard, and just a few seconds later, her voice came through, urgent and breathless. Jack, I picked up a signal some guy speaking Spanish. Deep voice, giving orders like a military commander. He said, burn the valley to the ground. Leave no one alive. He called Victor a stupid dog for losing to him. That's Phantasma, I'm sure of it. Jack nodded, his eyes flashing with cold intensity as he heard that name confirmed. He had heard about Phantasma, a former Mexican Special Forces commander who had left the military to join the cartel, turning it into a terrifying criminal organization with military tactics and a ruthless penchant for violence. If Victor was a wolf, then Phantasma was a tiger, and Jack knew this tiger wouldn't be as easy to handle as the goons he had just taken down. Jack stepped into the house, calling the team over the radio with a deep, commanding voice. Everyone listen up. We just took down Victor. But the real mastermind is coming Phantasma, a guy who's way more dangerous. He's got a bigger army, armored vehicles, maybe even helicopters, rifle, hold the North Ridge, and keep an eye on anything that flies. Boom! Check your gear. I need something bigger than a small C4. Whisper, stay on Phantasma's frequency. Doc, be ready in the house. This time it won't be easy. A chorus of copy that echoed from the team, and Jack felt the bond of the brothers who had stood by him through hundreds of battles, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of South America. Danny Boom Grayson burst onto the main road, his bushy goatee smeared with dirt, a mischievous grin still shining through despite the tense situation. Jack, I've got a few special surprises in my bag, and it's not just small C4. I've been holding on to these from the mission in Iraq enough to flip an armored vehicle, if you want. Jack nodded, his eyes lighting up as he saw Danny pull out a larger block of explosives, carefully wrapped in a waterproof bag. Good, Boom, he said. Set up at the bend in the main road. If Phantasma brings in heavy vehicles, I want to blow right from the start. Tommy's voice crackled to the radio, more urgent than before. Jack, I see a helicopter 3 miles out, moving fast from the south. There are at least 2 armored vehicles right underneath it, plus 10 regular trucks. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Jack frowned, his gaze locked onto Danny. Boom! Set the trap now. Prioritize the armored vehicles. Rifle, aim for the helicopter. If it drops lower, shoot at the rotor. I don't want it dropping troops here. The tension peaked as the sound of a helicopter echoed from afar, a low, rumbling noise slicing through the night air of Montana, accompanied by searchlights sweeping across the fields like a giant eye hunting for prey. Jack stood on the porch, Boomer growling beside him, its ears perked up as it sensed a new threat. He turned on the radio, and Sarah's voice came through immediately. Jack, Phantasma just ordered to burn the farm, kill the old man, send a message. He's in the helicopter. I can hear the rotor through his radio. Jack nodded, his gaze as cold as steel as he looked up at the sky, watching the shadow of the helicopter becoming clearer in the moonlight. Rifle, do you see it? He asked over the radio. Tommy's voice came through, calm yet sharp. I see it, Jack. The rotor's in my sights. I can take it down if you want. Jack shook his head, though Tommy couldn't see him, his voice deep but firm. Not yet, Rifle. Wait for it to come lower. I want Phantasma to think he has the upper hand. Boom, is the armored vehicle trap ready? Danny shouted from the main road, his voice filled with excitement against the wind. Ready, old man. 1 big one for the front car, 2 small ones for the guys in the back. Just get them around the corner, and I'll send them flying. Jack smirked, a cold smile passing across his face. Good, Boom. Wait for my signal. The sound of the helicopter grew closer, its spotlight sweeping over the farm, illuminating the barn and the wooden house like a silent declaration of war. Jack crouched behind a pile of hay near the fence, watching as the armored convoy and SUVs rolled around the bend of the main road, 2 heavy vehicles leading the way, followed by 10 regular ones, with a helicopter hovering above like a beast ready to pounce. He turned on the radio, his deep voice crackling through the frequency that Sarah had hacked from Phantasma. "Phantasma! You're stepping into my territory," Jack said, his tone as cold as a winter wind. "Back off now, or you'll have nothing left to take home." A raspy laugh crackled through the radio, and Phantasma's deep, arrogant voice responded. "Phantom, huh? I've heard about you an old has-been who thinks he's a ghost. You may have beaten Victor, but you have no idea who I am. I'm going to burn this place to the ground, and you'll die in the ashes." The helicopter descended, the wind from the rotor whipping up the dry grass around the farm, and Jack knew this was the moment to act. "Boom, blow it," Jack commanded over the radio, his voice sharp as a knife. A deafening explosion ripped through the air as Danny's massive bomb detonated right on the lead armored vehicle, flipping it over in a whirlwind of fire and smoke, metal shards raining down like confetti. The second vehicle slammed into the wreckage of the first, and two smaller explosions from Danny went off next, blowing out the tires of cars behind, turning them into a crumpled heap of scrap metal stuck on the road. Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. "The helicopter is lowering its rotor in range." A sniper shot rang out, hitting the main rotor, causing the helicopter to spin wildly, smoke billowing from the engine as it was forced to retreat with a helpless roar. Jack burst out from his hiding spot, moving like a shadow across the field, closing in on the wreckage of the vehicles. He saw Phantasma jump down from the helicopter before it took off, a tall guy with a scarred face and wild eyes, rifle in hand, shouting to the remaining henchmen, "Kill him! Kill that old man right now." But Jack was right behind one of the mercenaries, delivering a swift blow to the back of his neck, sending him crashing down, then charging Phantasma with a speed no one would expect from a 65-year-old. Phantasma turned back, raising his gun, but Jack dodged aside, using his dagger to slice through the gun strap, causing it to fall to the ground. He roared in anger, charging forward with a powerful punch. But Jack locked his arm, twisting his wrist in a swift motion, then delivered a hard kick to his knee, bringing him down. "I told you," Jack said, his deep voice cutting through the screams of the panicking henchmen. "You picked the wrong guy to fight." A final punch to the chin sent Phantasma crashing backward to the ground, unconscious in the field, his wild eyes now tightly shut in defeat. The tension eased as Jack stood tall. Boomer ran up to him, barking softly in a greeting of victory. Tommy reported over the radio, "The last vehicle has surrendered, Jack. They've thrown down their weapons." Danny laughed heartily from the main road. "Beautiful fireworks, huh, old man?" Sarah and Mike stepped out of the house, their eyes lighting up at the sight of Phantasma lying motionless at Jack's feet. He looked around, the dust slowly settling, leaving the valley in a serene silence under the moonlight. "He was a worthy opponent," Jack murmured, his voice deep yet steady, "but not worthy enough to beat me." He turned back toward the house, his team following behind, knowing that this battle had sent a clear message. Phantom and his crew were not something any cartel could touch without paying a heavy price. The moonlight faded over the Ironwood Valley, giving way to the first rays of dawn breaking in the east, casting a brilliant golden hue over the fields of barley in front of Jack Buck Larson's farm. The dust from the battle with Phantasma still lingered in the chilly air, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder and burnt metal from the wrecked SUVs scattered along the main road. Phantasma, the ruthless leader of the cartel, now lay unconscious in the field, his scarred face twisted in defeat, his hands bound tightly with the barbed wire Jack had used to secure him just minutes before. His surviving henchmen knelt scattered around the wreckage, hands raised in surrender, their bewildered eyes watching Jack's legendary task force emerge in the shadows like living ghosts amid the smoke and flames. Jack stood there, Boomer beside him barking softly in a welcome of victory, his worn leather boots caked with dirt and dried blood from the enemies he had just taken down. He took a deep breath, the morning air filled with the scent of fresh grass and damp earth of fragrance he loved in Montana, now mingling with the peace that returned after the storm of war. His team gathered around him. Tommy Rifle Callahan descended from the northern hill, his sniper rifle slung over his shoulder, his cold blue eyes shining with satisfaction. Danny Boom Grayson racing from the main road, his scruffy beard smeared with dirt, his mischievous grin still intact despite just blowing up two armored vehicles. Sarah, Whisper, Bennett, and Mike Doc Harper emerged from a cabin, Sarah clutching her laptop like a trophy, while Mike carefully checked the medical kit. With the precision of a battlefield doctor, they had achieved a resounding victory over Phantasma and the cartel. But Jack knew this was not just his win or his team's. There was something bigger waiting ahead, and he could feel it in the morning air. Jack returned home, the team following behind him, his footsteps slow on the porch like a commander who had just completed his mission but remained alert to what lay ahead. He sat down at the kitchen table, the flickering light from the oil lamp casting shadows on the valley map, now marked with new red dots indicating the locations where Phantasma and his henchmen had been taken down. Sarah sat across from him, opening her laptop, her voice light yet tinged with worry. "Jack, I just picked up the last signal from Phantasma's frequency before the helicopter pulled out. He ordered the remaining guys to send a message, but now he's done, and those henchmen out there can't get in touch with anyone. We did it, huh?" Jack nodded, his gaze thoughtfully sweeping over the map, his fingers tracing the jagged lines he had drawn since the first day of preparing for this battle. "He's finished," he muttered, his voice deep yet firm. "But the cartel won't back down. Phantasma is their strongest, and if we take him down, they'll think twice about coming back here. But I don't want to rely solely on our team." He looked up, meeting the eyes of his comrades, the brothers who had stood by him through thick and thin, and continued. "This valley isn't just mine. Ellie, Harper, the people here, they have a stake in this too. I want them to rise up, not just for us to protect." Tension escalated as a soft but firm knock echoed through the quiet house. Jack stood up, Boomer barking softly, his ears perked up in alertness. He opened the door to find Ellie Harper standing there, her light blue eyes sparkling in the dawnlight, her gray hair neatly tied back, dust from the overnight drive still clinging to her. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling yet filled with determination he had never seen in this gentle neighbor. "I heard the explosion from far away. The whole valley heard it. I know you did something big last night. I'm here to say that the folks around here aren't just sitting idly by. We want to help." Jack furrowed his brow, his gaze sweeping over Ellie, realizing she wasn't just there to express gratitude or check in. He gestured for her to come inside, closed the door behind her, and sat down at the kitchen table once more, his team standing around, curiously eyeing the small but tough woman. "Ellie," Jack said, his voice deep yet gentle, "last night, we took down the Victor Morales cartel, and a guy named Phantasma, the one behind it all. They want to take my land, this valley, to set up a drug route. We won, but they'll be back. What can you help with?" Ellie sat down, her callous hands clenched tightly on the table, her eyes shining with determination that Jack recognized immediately, the determination of someone who had lived through tough times and would never back down. "Jack, I'm not stupid," she said. "I know you're not just some old farmer growing wheat. The explosions, the way you handled that crowd, that's something only the military does. But this valley is my home, and the home of dozens of other families. We don't want to just stand by and watch you and your team fight for us. We want to join in and protect ourselves." Jack tilted his head, his eyes lighting up as he listened to Ellie. An idea began to take shape in his mind, an idea he had never considered when he started this fight. "Ellie," he asked, his voice deep but tinged with curiosity, "what do you mean?" "The people here aren't soldiers or farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers. What can they do against the cartel?" Ellie smirked, a smile filled with unexpected confidence. "Jack, we don't need guns or bombs like you do. But we have eyes, we have ears, we have trucks and tractors. Last night, when the explosions went off, I caught a few people, Bill Thompson, Mary Jenkins, some guys from the cafe. We saw the cartel's cars racing by, and we started blocking the roads with our trucks, lighting up the whole valley, calling the police. We didn't fight, but we made them panic. We want to do more than that." Jack nodded slowly, his eyes lighting up as he listened to Ellie talk about a community that wasn't just sitting idle, but had started to take action in their own way. He turned to the team, seeing Tommy smirking, Danny whistling in surprise, Sarah nodding as if she understood, and Mike looking at Ellie with clear respect. "Ellie," Jack said, his voice deep but carrying a rare excitement, "you're right. The team and I can beat them this time, again and again. But if this valley wants to be safe for good, we need everyone to get involved. Not to pick up guns, but to do what you just said. Watch, block their paths, send a message that Ironwood is no place for those cartel thugs. The tension peaked when the radio crackled to life. Tommy Rifle Callahan's urgent voice coming through from the North Ridge. Jack, I see movement about 3 miles south. Not as many vehicles as during the Phantasma incident, but enough to cause trouble. 5 SUVs. Could be the rest of cartel. They're moving slowly, like they're testing to see if you're still here. Jack furrowed his brow. His gaze locked onto Ellie, then quickly responded over the radio. Rifle, hold your position and don't fire yet. Whisper, listen in and see what they're saying. Sarah ran her fingers over the laptop, her headphones snug in her ears, then looked up with a sense of urgency. Jack, they're the remnants of Phantasma, reporting to someone further out. They're saying, the old man is still there. Phantasma has failed. They're not planning to attack right now, just scouting, but if they report back, there'll be a bigger wave coming. Jack nodded, his eyes lighting up with a new plan not just to defeat this group, but to turn the valley into something the cartel would never dare to touch again. Ellie, Jack said, his voice deep yet commanding. Call your people, Bill, Mary, anyone who's ready. I want them out there right now, blocking the road with trucks, lighting up the whole valley, making it look like Ironwood is waking up. My team will handle the scouts, but I want them to see that it's not just me. The entire valley is rising up against them. Ellie nodded, her eyes shining with determination, then sprinted to her pickup. Phone pressed to her ear to rally the townsfolk. Jack turned to the team and quickly commanded, Rifle, aim warning shots to panic them when they see the civilians. Boom! Set off a few small explosives on the side road, nothing too big, just enough to make them think they're surrounded. Whisper, send a fake signal on their frequency to make them believe Phantasma is dead. Doc, stay here with me. The team nodded, dispersing like shadows, ready for the final act of the night. The sound of Ellie's truck echoed from a distance, followed by the engines of Bill Thompson, Mary Jenkins, and dozens of other folks in their old pickups and noisy tractors rolling out from nearby farms, their headlights blazing to the fields like a wall of light. Jack stood on the porch, Boomer by his side, watching the valley folks gather unarmed, no bombs, but with a unity he had never witnessed before. A small explosion from Danny popped off down the side road, accompanied by a warning shot from Tommy that struck the ground right in front of the cartel's vehicle, sending them into a panic as they turned and raced back south. The tension eased as Sarah reported over radio. Jack, they're retreating. They think the whole valley is a trap, and my fake signal made them believe Phantasma is done for. They're running scared. Jack smirked, a rare smile lighting up his weathered face. He stepped outside and saw Ellie standing by the pickup, her eyes sparkling as she looked at the valley coming to life in the dawn light. Jack, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. We did it. Not just you, but all of us. Jack nodded, his hand resting on Ellie's shoulder, his voice deep yet warm. Ellie, you and the people have done what my team couldn't do alone, turn this valley into something the cartel wouldn't dare touch. Not with guns, but with the strength of your own. He looked around, seeing his team gather, their eyes shining with pride as they witnessed the community they protected now standing up to defend itself. The bright dawn spread over Ironwood, bringing with it the promise that this valley was not just Jack's land, but a home for all, safeguarded by the power of unity that no enemy could break. The brilliant dawn spread over the Ironwood Valley, the early rays of sunlight piercing to the thin mist, casting a vibrant golden hue over the fields of wheat in front of Jack Buck Larson's farm. The growling engines of the remaining cartel had faded into the void, leaving behind the peaceful silence that this valley had known before Victor, Blade, Morales, and Phantasma brought war to its doorstep. The dust from Danny, Boom, Grayson's explosions gradually cleared, revealing the wrecked SUVs scattered along the main road, remnants of a battle that Jack and his team, along with the unexpected strength of community, had turned into a resounding victory. Jack stood on the porch, Boomer lying beside him, ears perked up as if savoring the return of tranquility, his gaze sweeping over the valley with a mix of pride and contemplation. Phantasma had fallen, the cartel had retreated, but he knew this was not just a victory for one night. It was the beginning of a legacy that would protect Ironwood forever. Ellie Harper stood nearby, her old pickup parked by the fence, her light blue eyes shining as she watched the Valley folks Bill Thompson, Mary Jenkins, and dozens of others slowly climb down from their trucks and tractors, turning off the headlights they had used to push back the cartel. They weren't armed, didn't fire a single shot, but their unity, the bright lights, the roaring engines, and their steadfast presence achieved what even Jack's special forces couldn't do alone. They transformed Ironwood into a place the cartel wouldn't dare set foot in again. Jack stepped down from the stairs, his worn leather boots crunching on the hard ground, his voice deep yet warm as he spoke to Ellie. "You and the people have done something I never expected, Ellie. This valley isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to all of us." Ellie let out a faint smile, a smile filled with the pride of someone who once thought she was just a small part of this story. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "you gave us a reason to stand up. Last night, when I saw the lights and heard the explosions, I knew that if you could beat them, then we could do something too. Now we won't just sit back anymore." Jack nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder, feeling the shift in the air, not just a victory over the cartel, but the awakening of a community that once thought it was powerless. Tension escalated as the radio crackled to life from inside the house. Sarah whispered Bennett's urgent voice, slicing through the quiet of the early morning. "Jack, I just picked up a new signal, not from the group that just ran, but from further away, possibly the cartel's headquarters. They're talking about Phantasma, saying he's failed. And the valley is a death trap. They're not planning to come back right away, but they're plotting a bigger attack, maybe in a few weeks." Jack frowned, his gaze locking onto Ellie, then stepped into the house with quick strides, his team gathering around a kitchen table. Curious yet wary of this new information, Sarah looked up from her laptop, her fingers pausing mid-type, her voice dropping to a serious tone. "Jack, they're scared of you, scared of this whole valley now. But they're not backing down. They're talking about bringing in more mercenaries, heavy firepower. They want revenge for Phantasma." Jack nodded, his gaze sweeping over Tommy Rifle Callahan, Denny, Boom Grayson, Mike Doc, Harper familiar faces he trusted with his life. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low but as firm as a rock. "But this time, we have something they don't expect, not just my team, but all of Ironwood." Tommy smirked, his hand stroking the sniper rifle. "If they bring in mercenaries, I'll show them what Montana-style sniping is all about. But you're right, the locals surprised me last night. They didn't need guns to send those guys running." Danny burst out laughing, slapping his hands on the table, his voice filled with excitement. "Exactly. Who would have thought a truck and some headlights could do that? I love this way of making them panic, without a big bang." Mike nodded, his gentle gaze lighting up as he looked at Jack. "Jack, you've turned this valley into something we're not just protecting, but they're standing up for it too. That's a true legacy." Jack stood up, stepped out onto the porch once more, and looked at the townsfolk in the valley gathering not to fight, but to talk, to plan, to share what they had done the night before. He saw Bill Thompson, a tall farmer with graying hair, recounting how he had blocked the road with his truck, and Mary Jenkins, a petite single mother, laughing heartily as she told about turning on all the lights in her house to make the cartel think the whole valley was waiting for them. Jack smirked, a rare smile flickering across his weathered face. "Legacy," he murmured to Boomer, his deep voice resonating in the morning air. "It's not just about beating them. It's about leaving behind something unbreakable." The tension peaked when another pickup truck rolled in, not from the townsfolk, but from the local sheriff, Hank Sheriff Cooper. He stepped out, his sharp brown eyes scanning the chaotic scene left in the wake of the wrecked vehicles. Phantasma bound up, and the scattered henchmen surrendering across the field. "Jack," Hank called out, his voice deep yet tinged with disbelief. "I got reports from the townspeople about explosions, lights, and this bunch running wild to the south. What the hell just happened here?" Jack stepped forward, shaking Hank's hand with firm grip, his gaze calm yet piercing. "Sheriff," he said, his voice deep but clear, "last night, the Victor Morales cartel and a guy named Phantasma came to take my land, this valley. My team fought them off, but it wasn't just as the townsfolk stood up, blocked their path, and sent them into a panic. This is a victory for all of Ironwood, not just for me." Hank frowned, his gaze sweeping over Ellie and the other townsfolk nearby, then landing on Phantasma unconscious in the field. "Jack, I've been here for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. You did what the police couldn't do, drive the cartel out of the valley. But you know they'll be back, right? They won't let this go." Jack nodded, his eyes flashing with a cold yet confident glint. "I know, Sheriff," he replied. "But next time, they won't just be facing me and my team. They'll be up against the whole valley. The people have awakened, and they won't let Ironwood fall into those hands again. We'll be ready not just with guns, but with the very strength of our community." Hank nodded slowly, his gaze lighting up with clear respect as he looked at Jack, Ellie, and the Special Forces team standing behind him. The tension eased as Hank returned to the vehicle, calling over the radio to report the situation and request state support to handle the captured henchmen and Phantasma. Jack stood there, Boomer by his side, gazing at the Ironwood Valley bathed in the dawn light, a place that was once peaceful, now disrupted by war and stronger than ever. His team gathered around the porch, their eyes lighting up as they watched the valley's people gradually return to their daily lives, but with a newfound confidence, believing they could protect themselves. Tommy patted Jack on the shoulder, his voice deep yet warm. "Jack, you did it. Not only did you beat them, but you also left behind something greater. Ironwood is now a name that the cartel will fear." Danny laughed heartily, adding, "Yeah, old man, they'll tell stories about the Valley of the Phantom, where the farmer and the people made them run for their lives." Sarah nodded, holding her laptop, her voice gentle. "Jack, this isn't just a victory. It's a legacy. We've given them the power to stand up for themselves." Mike smiled softly, his kind eyes on Jack. "You've turned this place into a home, Jack, not just for you, but for everyone." Jack looked at his team, then at Ellie and the people of the valley, his voice deep and resonant like a final promise. "We're not just protecting Ironwood. We're making it invincible. The cartel might come back, but next time, they won't just see me, they'll see this entire valley, ready to push them out by any means necessary. This is our legacy, not Phantom's, but all of ours." He turned back toward the house, Boomer following closely behind, the sunrise casting a silhouette, like a symbol of seasoned farmer, a ghost, and now, a guide for an undefeated community under the vast Montana sky. Thank you for joining us on the thrilling journey of Jack Buck Larson, a veteran who transformed a small farm into an unbeatable fortress, alongside his Special Forces team, and the entire Ironwood Valley standing up against the darkness of the cartel. If you're moved by the courage, brotherhood, and strength of community in this story, please hit like and subscribe so you won't miss out on more emotional adventures about the true heroes of America. From clever battles to unwavering legacies, we hope you find pride and hope in every moment. We'll see you in the next video. Stay tough, stay proud, and see you soon.